Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Bald and Bloviating podcast. I am your host, Mookie Spitz, and I am the bald one who is now bloviating with Ed Powell. Ed and I go back many, many years, and we enjoy, for the most part, sharing science tidbits, observations about the latest theories and developments in science and mathematics. Ed, as you'll soon see, is a very, very smart guy. He's a doctorate in physics from Princeton. And as one of the smartest guys I know, I also love talking politics with him. And as we all know, we live in quite interesting times, and Ed has a particular point of view as to the role of the presidency, as to the evolving nature of the events that are unfolding. And I have usually expressed different points of view from Ed, so I thought I would bring him on and we would have a lively time discussing what's been top of mind for most of America, not only now, but pretty much for the last 8 to 10 years. Welcome aboard, Ed.
Hello there.
Thanks for joining us. And I thought I would kick it off by exploring the boundaries or the definition of the authority of the executive branch of the United States of America. What exactly is the role of the president, and how is Donald J. Trump either adhering to or deviating from what we would consider established norms and even etiquette, and what could be traced all the way back to the good old Constitution in terms of the separation of powers and what our founders thought would be expeditious for the country moving ahead?
Well, Article 2, Section 1, the executive power shall be vested in a president of the United States of America. So that pretty much answers the question. Now, from the standpoint of sort of more recent history, I think what has ended up happening is that the Congress and to a certain extent various presidents have given up that power to sort of the unelected bureaucracy in the executive branch. And so what I think President Trump is trying to do is sort of take that power back from the bureaucracy. And this is causing a lot of pain, and it's causing a lot of consternation. But I think there's nothing particularly exceptional about it. I mean, if you think about what presidents in history children are taught to venerate, whether it's George Washington or Abraham Lincoln or Franklin Roosevelt, they all exercised the executive power in, if not a dictatorial way, a strong way, and the bureaucracy, such as it was, did what they told them. I think in the post-war period, the bureaucracy, and there's sort of multiple different parts of the bureaucracy. There's the military, intelligence, foreign policy piece, and then there's there's the domestic policy piece. And I think they've basically been running on autopilot. And President Reagan said he wanted to sort of fix the bureaucracy, and I think the bureaucracy tends to be more left wing than the presidency, and of course George W. Bush said he wanted to tame it, but actually he made it far worse with the Patriot Act and other responses to 9/11. And Trump said he wanted to tame it in the first term, and he didn't. And I think what happened was that he spent the last 4 years trying to figure out a way to do it, and he sort of figured out a way to do it, and that is to delegate it to a bunch of autists, delegate it to a bunch of smart computer nerds and Elon and whatnot to go in and sort of find out what exactly is the bureaucracy doing. And the thing about the previous presidents, they would say, okay, well, what are you doing here and what are you doing there? And they would be, bombarded by briefings and papers and walls of classification and befuddlement as each of the various bureaucracies tries to sort of justify their existence. And the brilliance of what Elon has done is like we're going to ignore all of that. We're just going to go and see who is being paid. So we don't care about your classified briefings or anything. We're just going to go to the Treasury and look and see who is getting money and for what. And then we're going to suck all that into a computer program and use AI to generate a graph model, a graph analytics model to try to understand the relationship between each of the different payments from each of the different departments and each of the different recipients, whether they're, so far he's done USAID and he's doing Department of Education, but at some point he'll get Department of Defense and whatnot. And it turns out that it's these mutually reinforcing non-governmental organizations, NGOs, that are the recipients of all of this money, and they then give it to other NGOs, which give it to other NGOs. And only by using AI and the power of sort of the graph analytics, which is really very recent in the technology, can you get a sort of a big picture of where the money is flowing. And of course, what he's found out is that a substantial fraction of it, at least in USA, probably 90 to 95% of it, is essentially waste or fraud. So that's the kind of thing that's going on now, and I think it's upsetting a lot of people in Washington whose jobs depend on it. So these NGOs and the bureaucrats, and of course their friends in the Washington Post and the usual regime media, that all this money that is going for these various things that we've heard about on X over the past couple of weeks, that make no sense at all. And so I think the president is trying to take back the executive power, and by setting out certain policies in which he can do. That's what an executive order is. It's not a law. It's instructions to the executive branch using that Article 1, Section 1 power to say the policy of the executive is, for example, no longer to invest any money in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so that's certainly a policy he ran on. Should be no surprise to anyone that he wants to stop diversity, equity, inclusion, and along with many other things. But that just happens to be one that's in the news. And his policy is to stop it. And so then you go through all the payment system. You have this graph analytics model, and you find all of these payments for DEI that were all put in place by the previous administration using the same executive power that Trump is using, except that the bureaucracy was, of course, much more friendly to the previous administration than they are to Trump. So they weren't fighting him so much. So that's kind of what's been going on for the last couple of weeks. And for people who are, like myself, very, against racial discrimination, which is what DEI is, and who are against the bureaucracy running wild without any checks and balances, which they have been for decades. It's a glorious thing to behold, and I thank Elon for doing it. But I don't think it's an abuse of executive power. Certainly, Trump does not have a quarter of the executive power that Franklin Roosevelt did, or Abraham Lincoln, or half the presidents that you could name in the past.
You mentioned the term bureaucracy, kind of as a capital B bureaucracy. And it seems to encompass, if I'm correct, Congress, the legislative branch.
No,
So,
it's the
so if
executive branch. It's the all of the bureaus. That's what bureaucracy means. All the bureaus. USAID, Department of Education, Department of Labor, Department of Agriculture, all of the different executive departments. The Congress is Congress, and the courts are the courts, and the executive branch is the executive branch. And
okay,
the bureaucracy is sort of the unelected permanent uh, people in these executive agencies that basically do whatever they want, no matter what the president or Congress, for that matter,
well
tell them
that
to do.
well that's a bold statement, but let's dial it back for just a little bit. Okay, so thanks for clarifying that we're discussing the bureaucracy in terms of the numerous departments that are allocated funds ostensibly from Congress to perform particular duties based on, to your point, policy. Now, where the pushback lies, especially over the last 3, 4 weeks with Trump's 300 or so executive orders, with, as you say, Elon and his musketeers
Ooh, I like
basically,
that.
basically going into all these organizations. And I think it's premature to really jump to conclusions. You're dealing with what I would assume petabytes of data. And I would also assume that the duties of Musk and his teams have been mostly just reading all of that data and at least doing cursory analysis. So, leaping to conclusions about corruption and fraud and the magnitude of waste at this early point, I would dare say is premature. That all said, rather than concentrate on the efficacy and value of Musk's campaign here, which in principle I agree with, the problem that I have is similar to the problem that others have expressed, which is the apparent overreach of the executive in terms of not only reading a bunch of data, but mandating significant and now seismic changes in how these departments within the bureaucracy are conducting themselves. So by fiat, by decree, if we zoom in on, let's say, USAID, the sign is down, employees have been laid off, and essentially, the work of the organization across the planet has ground to a standstill. Now, I understand that USAID exists as an expression of the executive branch. USAID executes based on the policy decisions of the executive, but they are empowered by Congress with a budget and with its own mandate. So where people are outraged or at the very least concerned is the notion that the president by decree can basically pull the plug on a department. As Elon himself mentioned just yesterday, his goal is to delete entire departments from this capital B bureaucracy that you mentioned. One guy empowered by the President of the United States vaporizing departments. Now, again, given the separation of powers, given the traditional role of Congress as a coalition body, representation of the will of the people, at least in principle, they seem completely marginalized and excluded from this project here. Similarly, and in parallel, the judiciary is starting to make moves, declaring many of these actions illegal,
No, that's not
based
what they've done, but that's
based
okay.
based on their interpretation of the law. So, we can clarify that, but there's been pushback from the judiciary and pushback, at least from Democrats in Congress. Hold on a second. To your point, whether we're breaking laws or not, just in terms of etiquette and tradition, you want to appraise an agency, you want to examine a department, you want to scrutinize how the money's being spent. Well, let's work together. Let's figure out how we're going to go about deconstructing and then reconstructing the federal bureaucracy. Instead, you've got King Donald, by decree, sending in the musketeers to analyze and ostensibly dismantle entire departments of the U.S. government. That's the source of the outrage and concern.
No, I mean you're completely missing the point. The source of the outrage
I, I'm
is
I'm not I'm not the only
the
one, which is
the
which
the,
is
the,
why we're having this conversation. So
the
people are
source of the
just
outrage is the fact that these various slush funds have been found out and publicized, and that
no,
the
time out. It's you're begging the question in terms of the allegations of corruption and money laundering and whatever's going on. I think that's a side issue. What I'm getting at, and the reason I interrupted, is just to get to the heart of what we're discussing in principle. I'm not talking about just the emotional outrage that the left is experiencing because, again, it's Donald Trump back and he's the bad guy. That's not what I'm talking about here. I am talking about many, many educated, empowered, seasoned people who are expressing the possibility of air quote constitutional crisis. There are many, many smart people, and some even on the right, who are extremely uncomfortable, if not deeply concerned, about the rapidity of these actions, their depth, their comprehensive nature, and the fact that Congress has been marginalized in this process, the fact that Musk and his musketeers are not vetted. You've got, just to be specific and tactical, petabytes of data that are being transferred with zero supervision and the mere assurance that data privacy and security is being upheld. It's absolutely unprecedented. So, in principle, again, and we'll discuss it in a second, I agree with many of the things that are actually taking place. Like you, I'm on the libertarian side of the house. Like you, I believe in smaller government and less regulation. And like you, I feel that there's an incredible amount of graft and corruption. And again, in principle, a lot of what is taking place is welcome and embraced by a lot of people who are thinking and feeling it's been long overdue. What I'm trying to get at is how it's being done. And I think that's problematic.
so I think what happened in the previous Trump administration, obviously he was not intended to win, and he won, kind of by an electoral college fluke. Uh, w- when Before the electoral college met in late 2016, 51 former members of the intelligence community came out with a statement trying to sway the electors to change their votes from Trump to Hillary, saying that that Trump had been colluding with Russia. We've now found out that, in fact, it wasn't just the 51 former intelligence officials, but they were actually organized by members of the Obama CIA to do this. The emails have come out. So what we see here is we all know that the election that happens in November is not the real election for president. It's that elects electors, and the real election comes in December when the electors meet and cast their vote. So between November and December, um, these members of the intelligence community attempted to sway the votes of the electors unsuccessfully, using this what turned out to be a lie about Trump's collusion with Russia, and that was organized by the Obama appointees in the intelligence community. So what ended up happening in the Trump's first term was that immediately out of the gate he was basically made impotent. Part of that was due to this Russia thing. Part of it was due to his own incompetence and the fact that he never expected to win, and so he didn't have a team put together. So he picked some really poor choices for some of his appointments, and so he was essentially impotent from day one, with the exception of the things that the donors really wanted, like the tax cuts that he was able to do. And of course, everything went off the rails during COVID. I think what happened when he lost the last election was that he spent the last 4 years assembling a team to really execute his policies, which he wasn't able to do. And I think what ended up happening was the plan, and I think this was turned up to 11 after Elon came on board, was that they would do a full court press, or to mix my metaphors, they would do a complete blitz and rush the passer. The passer being the bureaucracy. And so I think what he's been doing in the last 3 weeks is trying to do so many things so fast that he is inside the OODA loop of the bureaucracy media complex machine. The OODA loop is a concept from the military: the observe, orient, decide, act. And the media and the bureaucracy, for instance, this constitutional crisis thing that you mentioned, that is a media creation. Because if you look at all of the cable channels and the newspapers, and if you see it on X, there's like montage. Collage, something like that, of like constitutional crisis like 15 times in 15 different places, and then they go on to. So obviously that is not organic. That's the constitutional crisis thing is manufactured, and it's manufactured by the bureaucracy and the Post and the Times and a couple of other things, mostly the New York Times, and then it sort of becomes the groupthink for a while. And what Trump is doing, but it takes like 2 or 3 days to like get that, to come up with constitutional crisis, and then they have to publish constitutional crisis in the New York Times. Then it has to be picked up by other things. And so between the time when they're sitting around, and this is more or less documented by leakers, by the way, I'm not saying anything that's not true, this that hasn't been documented. I can't do it on the podcast, obviously. So by the time that some guy sitting around the table comes up with, hey, constitutional crisis, and the time it becomes ubiquitous in the media is 2 or 3 days. And so what Trump is doing is he's going faster than that. He's moving faster. He's inside their decision loop. He's inside the old media's, the legacy media's ability to counter things. And this, again, I think is probably Elon's idea, because that's exactly how Elon works his businesses, is to do things as fast as possible. And so he's faster than the bureaucracy, he's faster than the media, and he's faster than most of the judges. When you look at some of these temporary restraining orders, not that he hasn't been ruled against, then he can't be, because he's, again, the executive power shall be vested in the President of the United States of America. So it's this one judge, is it the McConnell? His name is McConnell, and is he in Rhode Island. I could be wrong. I could look it up. But a TRO on some USAID type of spending. His wife gets money from USAID, and you think, well, that's interesting. So isn't that a conflict of interest on the judge's part? Shouldn't he have recused himself and asked for another judge whose household income is not dependent on the item in front of the judge? But of course,
Well,
only conservative judges do that. Liberal judges don't care. And so what we get is these TROs, which are then thrown out. But the point of them is not to stop Trump, because you can't stop Trump, because the executive power shall be vested in the President of the United States. He is going to win, but it's to delay stuff. And that's what he said. That's what Trump said in the press conference he and Elon had the other day. But it doesn't matter, because again, you fled the zone. So, okay, you get a TRO on something in USAID. So you go to the Department of Education. You get a TRO on the Department of Education. Fine, you go to the Department of Agriculture. In other words, you go faster than everybody can do. Now, one last thing on USAID. And in fact, in the way Congress allocates money, because I'm familiar with this since I work for the military. Congress has these things called program elements, and they are line items in the budget. You can look them up. And they are, in the military's case, this it's like one line. You will spend $110 million on science and technology projects to further test and evaluation. And then in the, what do they call it? The authorization document, or the there is another document, sort of sense of Congress, where they give a little bit of guidance, like, yeah, it's not just that, but like, we really care about AI, and we really care about autonomous systems. So do something there. So you get $110 million, and you get this guidance, which is less than a paragraph, and then it's up to, in the bureaucracy's case, in this military's case. Well, how do we understand the intent of Congress? We want to do science and technology. We want to do it on things that affect test and evaluation, and we want to focus more attention on AI and autonomy than we do, some of the other things. That's our goal. And how do we do it? And then we then figure out how to spend, what things we'll spend the 110 million on, and we have RFPs, and people respond, and there's boards to determine which thing, blah blah blah. The Defense Department actually, it works fairly well, but some of these other organizations, and USAID obviously is the most it's the most obviously corrupt, which is one of the reasons why they went there first. The organization employed something like 10,000 people, and Rubio did a Secretary Rubio, who's now in charge of USAID, and looked at the statutory requirements for what USAID must do. So he looked at the legislation, what it must do, and he figured he could do all of the statutory requirements with 300 government employees. Now, I don't know. I don't think Rubio is a radical particularly. I do think he is just looking at it, and if he can do the whole thing with 300 employees rather than 10,000, that's perfectly reasonable to me.
yeah,
And you just lay everything off.
Ed, I get it, but things are being mixed up in your argument. So I go back to how I laid this out, which is I'm in agreement in principle with what's going on. Cut government, cut graft, cut waste. Analyze the shit out of those spreadsheets. Eliminate unnecessary jobs. You're begging the question of my question, which is not about this idea that we should make government more efficient by taking it down to the line item level and using AI and whatever technology to optimize it. That's not really what I'm talking about. What I was talking about was the apparent overreach of this flooding the zone. The fact that the judiciary needs to catch up to the executive, who's basically just doing whatever he wants, based upon, I get it, mandate. Trump won the popular vote. Trump won the swing states. Most of the American people in a New York Times survey agree that many of the things he's doing is long overdue. That's not really what I'm talking about. What I'm trying to get at, for example, when we're talking about constitutional crisis in air quotes, you can allege that it's a media manufactured absurdity, but Trump himself has literally said within the last 24 hours, we're going to have to take a look at those judges. For example, he has already implicitly stated, if not explicitly, that, well, we're going to do what we want based on the mandate of the American people. And whether the judiciary likes it or not, it's gonna happen. So I think this fear of a constitutional crisis is grounded not so much in this media hype, which is no doubt accelerating it, but within Trump's own words and actions that are exemplified by the last 3 to 4 weeks. So we can agree or disagree about what Trump is doing. And when it comes down to the logistics, if not the timing, I'm pretty much on board. I'm with you. Let's slice and dice that bureaucracy. Let's get rid of the waste. And let's take a cold, hard look at the entire federal government, even on a policy level. Bravo. Bring it on. But what I'd really like to get at is this notion of, and I repeat, executive brashness and what could be construed as overreach. And I want to do it within the context, historically, of projecting forward. You say again that Trump has this vision, which he certainly does, and that he's going for it in a way that is not without historical precedent. And I agree with you. FDR, in terms of doing the New Deal, was king and emperor compared to almost all the presidents who followed him. That's historically documented. And Trump, in ways, is going back to that model. But the precedent that it sets moving forward, and I'm curious about your opinion, Trump's not going to be there forever, and the Republicans aren't going to be there forever. So, to me, what's happening is a transformative reevaluation of the role and logistical actions of the President of the United States. And what's to conceivably preclude a progressive liberal Democrat? Let's pretend AOC in 12 years is president of the United States. What's to prevent her from doing exactly what Trump is doing in terms of eviscerating departments, changing policy, sending in her own commando unit to build back up what's been torn down? I am just concerned that we're introducing such a level of flooding the zone in chaos by fiat, by decree, that we're marginalizing Congress to the point that this super empowered president can run amok, not only now, but almost forever into the future. We've opened up the barn doors to executive power, and I'm not quite sure if we've established any kind of limit to it.
So I normally would agree with you that uh, that you don't you get what's called regime uncertainty, which is sort of the term where business essentially is stymied and basically all new business is stopped because they have no idea what's going to happen tomorrow, right, or the next day or the next day. And so you want, for economic growth, you want kind of stability. you want things to more or less stay the same. Yeah, okay, so the taxes can go from 39% to 37%. That sort of thing is within the within the possibility of change that people can deal with. But you don't tend to want radical change because that induces regime uncertainty and that can interfere with economic growth. And that's normally true. So I agree with you there. What happens is, and I'm not a particular believer in this, the cycles, but every 80 years or so, we reach a kind of an existential crisis in the United States. And obviously, the first was the Civil War, and the second was the Depression of World War II, and now we've reached the third. And in an audio podcast, it's not possible to show this, but when COVID hit in 2020, and this is all Trump's fault. Well, COVID wasn't Trump's fault. The response was his fault, and Congress's fault. There was a huge expenditure of money, which boosted inflation, and then the COVID expenditures. You know, Biden doubled down in 21. Um, and so you'd think, okay, there's this big spike in spending as we paid people to stay home and businesses to keep employees at all of these different programs. But you would think in 22 it would have come, the spike would have come down to more or less where it was, in 19. The spending would have been more or less where it was. And so, but if you look at the graph, and I'm sorry I have to describe this um, audio, it only came about halfway down, and then it went up uh, further, and so the difference between the expenditures and the receipts, which went out of control with COVID, never came down to what it was in 19, and then grew to the point where this fiscal year it's going to be $2 trillion. That was all Biden and the Democratic Congress. I admit Trump has a lot of responsibility for starting this crazy thing with the COVID and the PPP and all that stuff. But a $2 trillion deficit is existential threat to the United States. It's not something that can go on forever. In fact, I don't think we can make it to 2030 with this kind of deficit. I think we'll have a monetary crisis, and everyone will get poor, drastically poor, because either we'll have hyperinflation or we'll have some sort of a kind of depression like in the 30s. So we are kind of in the years before an existential crisis. And so I do think that while in principle you want things to be stable, I do think we've gotten to the point where we have to do something. And I think if we figure out a way to cut the budget radically, and stay within the law, then I think we should take the opportunity to do it. Elon said the other day that he thought, and there are people who testified in front of Congress who say that there's a quarter to $500 billion worth of fake expenditures in Medicare and Medicaid. And that's mainly because there's no controls on outgoing money. It's weird. Like you and I, before 3 weeks ago, if we knew how, you got to understand how to do this. If we submitted a bill to the U.S. government for $100,000 for something, they would just pay it. Now you may get caught at doing this, but so many people do it. Because what they end up doing is that they have a contract with Medicare, and I happen to know someone who spent time in prison for doing this. Well, acquaintance. You just submit a bunch of extra bills, and they just pay them. Now, there are investigations, and occasionally get caught, like this acquaintance of mine, and you do time in jail. But most people don't. So there are no controls on the expenditures, and just by adding the controls, just by adding a control to Social Security to say, is this person alive? Um, is this person
Once
in the
again,
United
Ed,
States?
in all fairness, once again, we're wading into the our Venn diagram overlap of violent agreement. I agree with you,
Well, how
but
else are you
what,
going to do it if you're not going to do
but
it radical? If it's not going to
yeah,
be
yeah,
radical, how else are you going to do it?
well, that's what I'm getting at. Is it absolutely necessary to rampage through the government in the manner that Trump is now, thereby inducing all of this whiplash, whether it's justified or not, whether it's legal or not, whether it's one way or the highway? I'm in agreement that, which is an incontrovertible fact, the interest that we're paying, Elon even mentioned this, right? The interest
Right.
that we're paying on the debt is equivalent to the DOD's annual budget, which is something like $850 billion a year, right? So it is clearly unsustainable, and you don't need to actually show the chart you're talking about. It doesn't take a vivid imagination or a rocket scientist to conclude that we are in an existential crisis with regard to debt as a
Yeah.
country. No, there's no doubt. And I don't think anyone's arguing with you. I think the disagreement is in the sense of urgency and the process by which Trump has taken it upon himself to go for it in a manner which is, at least in appearance, coming across as not only unprecedented since FDR, but potentially legally violative, and at the very least, clearly marginalizing the legislative branch and the judiciary in terms of almost this etiquette and respect for the institutions of government. Now you can make another argument that you got to do it. You got to break things in order to fix things. And I'm in partial agreement about this. I think you're going to have to upset a lot of people, and there's going to be more pain before we can have gain. And I think, Elon and the AI approach and shake, rattle, and roll really might be the only way to get to the heart of the problem. But what I'm getting at, though, is the unprecedented nature of this and looking into the future. As I mentioned, it's not just about maintaining stability for the investors. It's not just keeping everything within a few basis points quarter to quarter so that people don't freak out and they feel that they can invest and that consumers feel comfortable. It's about setting a precedent, a cross-generational precedent for this kind of power coming from the executive.
Okay. I just don't see that. I think Trump is working a little faster, but I don't think he's doing anything different than what Biden did in the previous administration. And I say Biden in the generic term because he obviously wasn't in charge. Um, I have a feeling that this is just a feeling. Well, it's based on a lot of things, but that Obama actually ran the last administration, and that without him being uh, without him being blame take the blame, he did all the things that he wanted to do. He did all the things in the Biden administration that he wanted to do in the previous administration, couldn't really do because of his own sort of legacy that he wanted to prescribe. But um I I have to bring it back to the at one sense, what is the principle? The principle is, yes, we want stability, yes, we want to obey the norms. um there is, if you look at the norms, Congress is completely dysfunctional. It hasn't passed the budget in years, doesn't pass any of the you know 13 or 18 or however many bills that to fund the government. It hasn't done that. um there is a lot of talk about filibustering judges. That no judge had ever been filibustered in the history of the country. until until the Bush administration, when Bush two, when the Democrats decided to filibuster some of his judges. But like Robert Bork, who, by the way, I don't think is a good guy, um, and I'm glad he's not on the Supreme Court, to be honest. He wasn't filibustered. Oh, the Democrats like yelled and screamed and made him out to be the worst person in the world, and kills babies and eats them for lunch, and they didn't filibuster him. So again, the norms have evolved. So at first it was like, okay, they're going to filibuster judges, and then Republicans, the Democrats. So the Democrats decided, okay, we're going to take away the filibuster uh, for judges, and then the Republicans took it away for Supreme Court judges, and now we've gone back to the norm. The norm was we don't filibuster judges, and yet in between there was this crisis this crisis of breaking norms in Congress, where at first there was there was one side and then the other side, and then now we've gone back to the norm, which is you don't filibuster judges and you don't filibuster uh, you know executive appointments. And I think that's good, because that was the norm. Now it's not the norm. It wasn't the norm in the 21st century, right? It was the norm for the last 200 years. But by this sort of tit for tat, we've kind of gotten back to the norm in Congress. And I think the norm that we're talking about in the executive branch, it was the norm back in the day that the president had control of the Congress or of the bureaucracy.
Yeah,
For example,
I'm not
you know,
disagreeing with you. I'm not
so
disagreeing with
it's not just Today, the Department of Agriculture terminated 18 contracts for a total of $9 billion, including contracts for, quote, Central American Gender Assessment Consultant
Yeah,
Services.
once again,
Brazil,
Ed,
I'm trying to make a point, which is, what do you think the American people want? Do they want Brazil forest and gender consultant services and women in forest carbon initiative mentor programs in Brazil, or not? I mean, that's the whole point, right? I mean,
No, it's not the whole point, Ed, because I'm agreeing with you and a majority of the American people are agreeing with you. That's not what we're talking about. You're bringing up examples of what people want, and they're doing what people want. But that's not what
isn't
I'm
that
talking about.
democracy?
Yeah, but again, it's about process. It's about air quote rule of law, and it's about keeping the semblance of some kind of structure to the relationship of the various branches in a way where we can maintain equilibrium, where we can maintain some kind of stability. Now, your point of view is basically screw it, right? There's already historical precedent based on a very aggressive, empowered executive. Trump is using those powers with the mandate of the American people.
And we have an
So go for it.
existential crisis. And no,
I'm
no,
I'm
not.
I'm
And we
agreeing
have
with
an
you.
existential crisis because we
Okay, all right, all
that's
right.
the not only do we have the war with Russia and the Taiwan situation, and all these crazy things abroad that are nuts, and the whole Gaza thing, and Trump's like, okay, we're going to solve all these problems right now, right? I mean, and you and I, like, I happen to be pro-Ukraine. I don't think the Russian invasion is a good idea, but on the other hand, I get what Trump's doing. Is like, we got to stop this. And we all understand, I think, because both of what the Constitution says and what the norms are, that the president has plenary power over foreign policy. So if he goes over and stops the war in Ukraine, there's nothing anybody can do about it. And the same thing is that if he, you know, basically, I think his Gaza thing is stupid, but independent of that, it's like, stop the wars, because the
Well,
wars are,
that's a good that's a good segue. So just to summarize the initial part of our conversation, you are saying that Trump is operating wholly and entirely within his constitutional mandate for acting as the executive of the United States. There's nothing violative. He has chosen to flood the zone. He's chosen to be aggressive, but he is going about his assigned duty as president and using Musk as his techno vehicle for doing so. That's your
Yeah,
point of view. Okay, just in
basically.
summary, I'm putting a cap on this because we've been talking for a while. My point of view is booyah, go for it. The libertarian in me is like, long overdue, big applause, with the caveat, as I've mentioned, that there does seem to be significant overreach, which will have long term consequences for the relationship between the different branches of government and conducting government in a manner that precludes radical and extreme oscillations between our binary political power system. That's it. So I'm agreeing with you in principle, but I'm putting a cautionary note on what's going on out of these concerns. And your point is we're in an existential crisis. Screw these concerns. We're all going to be broke in 5 years if Trump doesn't do exactly what he's doing right now. Does
So
that
let's get,
sound does
yeah,
that
but
sound right?
yeah, so let's give a historical example. I think that uh, that sort of talks about norms, um, and that is the Caesar example, right? And the founders, who were they read their Plutarch, they understood this, um, and to summarize it in two sentences, Caesar was sent to be the proconsul of Gaul. He conquered Gaul, killed 1 or 2 million Gauls, I guess. And then his term was up and he wanted to run for consul and they wouldn't let him. And in fact, they said they were going, if he comes back to Rome, he was going to be charged with all sorts of crimes, many of which he did not commit. I mean, killing 2 million Gauls is you would think would be one of the crimes. That wasn't the one he was talking about. It was mostly financial crimes. And so, of course, he invaded Rome. He took a legion to Rome and chased the senators out and caused the civil war, and that turned into Caesar seizing power, and then his nephew eventually creating the Roman Empire. And so they really the norm that really the founders really understood was that you really have to go out of your way to avoid Caesarism. And one of the things that you don't do is take a candidate for president or former president, and you subject them to lawfare. You don't, and that's what the pardon of Nixon was about, and a lot of the other presidents could have been hauled up on charges for what they did. General Grant, when President Grant, when he was president, did all sorts of crazy, corrupt things, the Teapot Dome scandal, and in the beginning in the 20s, and none of these people were attacked legally afterwards, and it was all because of the norm of trying to prevent Caesarism in the United States, which is a good thing. And so when that norm was broken in the last 4 years, and there is a bit of revenge in Trump's uh, methods for the breaking of that norm. Now, the norm is broken forever. You can't go back. That's the problem. What's funny was Lincoln was murdered, and the U.S. descended into, essentially military dictatorship until the Compromise of 1876, and so we came out of that dictatorship a free country again, in some senses a freer country again, because we didn't have slavery. But think of how many times that happened in the history of the world. Like hardly ever. And I think this breaking of the norms of the lawfare against President Trump. Um, I think that's the norm. That's one of the norms that you should be really seriously concerned about. If in fact breaking of the norms is something you care about, because that will cause Caesarism. It's not going to cause it with Trump. He's not the guy who's going to become Caesar. But if this continues, that's exactly what we're going to get. Is we're going to get a Caesar. And if you think Trump's rampaging through the bureaucracy is bad, you can't imagine what would happen if you get a Caesar in charge of the United States. So, yeah, I agree with you with norms, but the ones that are being broken are being broken by the Dems.
Well, again, that's an interesting point of view, and I'm not going to debate the elements of your argument. I think that many of them are valid, but it's a matter of perspective. It's a matter of maintaining some kind of balance. And you yourself admit that there's vengeance in the heart of our chief executive. And
Absolutely.
with that comes perhaps an overextension of elements of the executive branch, namely the DOJ and its affiliates. So I think it's tough times ahead. I think regardless of which aisle you sit your ass on, the norms are being broken. They're evolving and changing almost in real time. And again, what concerns me is exactly the same things that excite me. And I call this, in a sense, the Trump paradox. And the Trump paradox for me is that he is doing many of the things that should have been done decades ago.
Indeed.
And I'm even in agreement as to this idea of simply using America's hegemony and power in an unadulterated, direct way, which is stop trying to appease everyone and managing to piss everyone off, which has essentially been American Middle East policy for 70 years. Pick your sides, winner take all, and go for it. And in ways, there's an expedience, there's a wisdom to it, and there's an effectiveness to it. So even vis-a-vis the Ukraine situation, it is patently obvious that Ukraine can't be in NATO, as well as it being obvious that the land that Russia's taken, they're never giving back. So Trump simply leaping to these conclusions at the beginning of the negotiations rather than in their midst is more than anything else just cutting to the chase. Let's stop messing around here. We know what's going on. We know who really has the power, and just deal with the inevitable. I understand and appreciate that. So will the Europeans be marginalized? They're already marginalized. Will NATO be marginalized? Of course. And will Ukraine essentially be thrown under the bus? Yes, they will. And you know what? The same thing might happen to Taiwan. So smell the coffee, get on the gravy train, use your power, and go for it. I get it. But again, based on our conversation, I am more cautious and hesitant about the other side of that Trump paradox, which is this vengeance that we know is brewing, this apparently violative overextension and overreach of executive authority, and the potential problems that we're heading into as a direct result of, and this is a whole separate conversation, the extensive tariffs, this reconfiguring of our entire economy, and the results downstream of many of Trump's policies that I think won't be favorable for the very constituents who put Trump in power. But I don't have a
Yeah,
crystal ball.
I
I
kind of
don't have
agree.
a crystal ball, and I could be wrong, but I'm just bringing this up as the elemental features of this paradox. And on the one hand, in summary, And in principle, I think Trump is bringing about a revolution along the lines of what you've been suggesting is necessary and long overdue, and I'm in agreement. But the modus operandi and the general mood of this thing is frightening and disruptive in ways that I'm not sure they have to be.
I mean, I agree with you on on the tariff thing. I'm very very concerned about that. And like, how does the president get to like randomly put tariffs on people? Oh, Congress passed a law saying the president could randomly put tariffs on people. You know, that's the kind of thing. Is like Congress has been power is something that is seized or surrendered. And to a certain extent, Congress, for the last 70 years or so, has been surrendering its power, and the power has been seized by bureaucrats and judges. Now, the idea that a district judge can put a nationwide injunction on someone in the executive branch, that's ridiculous. That's never happened in the history of the world. That's purely a Trump thing. It started with Trump, never before. Generally speaking, one has to, if a district judge were to put a temporary restraining order or a injunction, it would be for his district. And the same thing with an appeals court. It would be for that area that the appeals court would do. And again, I could quote the Constitution for you: the judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court, and in such inferior courts as the Congress may from time to time ordain and establish. The judicial, the only court in the United States that can really do a nationwide injunction is the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court has thrown its power away too, because it does fewer and fewer and fewer cases each year, as if like they don't want to do their jobs. And so these district judges just seize power. They seize the power because the Supreme Court lets them and the Congress lets them. And these bureaucrats have seized power because Congress has let them and the presidents have gone along with it. When you talk about norms, what we have today is not the norm, not the 245-year norm. It's the 25-year norm. And I think that a correction is needed. And I think that what would you say? I want to ask you a question. We're getting near the end here. Given that the Congresses are a bunch of cowards and the Supreme Court doesn't want to do its job, and you see $2 trillion or more deficits, in the future, and you understand the resultant possible inflation or currency crisis, and you are the president of the United States, what would you do? And why would what you say, oh, I'll work with Congress? They're a bunch of idiots. They're a bunch of pussies. They don't do anything. So it's like, okay, what would you do? The country is on the line. What would you do? Mookie, you are president. What would you do?
I think that's a great question, and it gets to the heart of our debate and the heart of my Trump paradox, which is I agree in principle with so much of what he's doing, but I don't like how he's doing it. So, to answer your question based on that, I would be doing a lot of what he's doing, but I would be doing it not with a bullhorn, but more discreetly and, as possible, a little bit more collaboratively. So I would actually get the Democrats more on board too for many of these spending cuts. I would also be less partisan about my approach, less ideological in my approach. I get that USAID is the lowest of low hanging fruit. It's basically a $40 billion handout. And it goes all the way back to John F. Kennedy And I'm not even sure how efficacious it is. If you listen to the left side of the aisle, they're like, it's the soft power of the United States. I don't even think it's that anymore. I don't think people give a shit, and I don't think it makes any difference. So President Mookie would probably be like, right on, get rid of the whole goddamn thing. And I mean no disrespect or any kind of anti-humanism in terms of letting people starve, go blind, or get AIDS. But I just think it's charity work, and I think the rest of the world needs to step up too. Why are we building pup tents in Africa?
Yeah,
I don't think it
exactly.
I don't think it does anything for us, honestly. And I think long term we might even be doing more harm than good because we're not empowering the local countries to act on the behest of their own citizens. So I think it's welfare for the world. Get rid of the whole goddamn thing, to be honest with you. I'm on board. But what the problem is that a lot of Trump's actions, by their nature and by him bloviating and boasting and bullhorning this stuff, he's exacerbating the ideological divide. He is putting more attention to his actions, and he's opening himself up in his administration to more resistance, more objections, more lawsuits, and more contested action. We're a coalition government, whether we like it or not. And when the president sits at the resolute desk and acts like a king, every action has its own reaction. And I know he's full of vim and vigor and fire and brimstone, and he's pissed off, and I know he feels that we're in an emergency situation, and he's right. And I know he feels as a businessman that whenever he had to get something done, he had to just do it himself. I get it. But you're asking me what President Mookie would do, and President Mookie would chill the fuck out and do this in a way which is more discreet, more collaborative, and frankly, a little bit more under the radar. Because the inverse of flooding the zone, being high profile, announcing to the world every move you make, just doesn't make sense to me if you actually want to get shit done, if you actually want to have a coalition government, which is what we have, and actually want to bring about real and effective change that lasts without having a whiplash effect so that you're triggering the left to the point where they're going to have their own revenge moment and we're all going to pay for this shit for the next 30, 40, 50 years. So
And
that's
you
my
don't think
answer.
that you don't think that revenge moment was the last 4 years? See, that's what I think. I see the revenge moment being the all of the lawsuits, bankrupting Rudy Giuliani. Not that I think these guys are good guys, I mean, but bankrupting Rudy Giuliani and the
I'm not disagreeing with you.
$500 million
Yeah, I'm
judgment
with you.
against Trump for an obviously fake. Like he was in the women's department of a department store and asked this, like, well, the man has never been in a department store in his entire life. I mean, the whole thing was fake. It was all
Well,
fake,
whether
fake, fake,
whether
fake,
it
fake.
whether it was true or not, and we weren't there, I'm agreeing with you that that had its own overreach. I get
Yeah.
it. I get it. I'm not arguing that. What I'm saying though is for the sake of the country and for the sake of Trump's own policies, I truly wish he would just sometimes shut the fuck up and do shit.
Oh, I
And
agree. I
yeah,
agree. The whole Teddy Roosevelt, speak softly and carry a big stick. I'm very
yeah.
much in favor of that. Unfortunately, that's not his personality. But like, so a final question for you would be, I mean, we are in a hyper partisan environment. We have uh, um, Democrats, I look at them, who are defending the FEMA funding illegal aliens on the Roosevelt Hotel, uh, who are part of Tren de Aragua, um, Venezuelan gang, and they're defending them. It's like we should be spending money, uh, housing illegal alien gang members in the Roosevelt Hotel in New York, in Manhattan. So I mean that's pretty partisan. So you want to say like work with the Democrats? Like who? The only Democrat who I think is semi-sane is Fetterman. I mean, because he's a union guy. You know what I mean? He's a union Democrat. He cares about the workers. Does Chuck Schumer care about the workers? I don't know. I mean, I'd be very much more um, confident in the Democratic Party if I saw anyone who really cared about the American worker. I mean, does Pocahontas care about the American? I mean, I know Fetterman does because he comes from that. He comes from that part of Pennsylvania. He grew up in that. Yeah, he's never had a real job, but he knows people who have real jobs.
Well, conversely, I'd want to ask you, which CEOs were there in the wings at the inauguration? It was Zuck, it
Yeah,
was
all the
Elon, it was Jeff, right? It was Sergey. And where the hell was the Walmart family? Where the hell was Whirlpool? Zero manufacturing CEOs
yeah. I hear you.
attended the inauguration. So
No, I hear you.
if you're looking at the heartland and you're complaining that the American worker has been neglected,
Yep.
both parties are at fault. The Democrats clearly dropped the ball. Trump, at least in his campaigning, understood this, and he really just pulled the heartstrings and got even ethnic minorities in an unprecedented way to flip Democrat to Republican because of his message about economy, because of his message, ironically enough, about immigration. Because a lot of ethnic minorities who are legal here have a tremendous amount of resentment for those who are not. Trump totally got it. He got this from the beginning, which is why he won in 2015 as well. So if you look at Trump's understanding of the issues, he's got it much better than the Democrats have, for a decade, going all the way back to NAFTA and Clinton, who didn't get it. But now it's the crypto bros. It's TikTok that all of a sudden is great. It's lining up the technorati, the Mark Andreessens of the street who are, eager to kiss the ring because they know that gaining favor from the Donald will protect their companies, will deregulate crypto and social media and all the goodies that they're doing. And where the hell is concern for the dozen eggs and the gallon of milk? They
Yeah, I
don't
mean,
give it. They don't give a shit either.
I have a feeling that the CEO of Whirlpool didn't go down to Mar-a-Lago between November and January. I do. The weird thing, though, is that I think as far as the social media companies are concerned, I mean, we mentioned earlier that Trump is on, as well as cutting the size of government through Elon's Doge, he's on a revenge tour. And the social media companies, I think they knew that they were on the list of,
Oh,
uh,
absolutely.
a-
Especially Zuckerberg.
especially Zuckerberg. And so he he got his ass down to Mar-a-Lago in a purely self-defense move. Now, maybe he's changed. You probably listened to his interview on Rogan. Maybe he's changed. You exercise, you get a little testosterone, you change from the robot that you were to an actual human being. I don't believe he's particularly changed. I don't believe he was in favor of all of the censorship that he implemented on Facebook. But he didn't seize the power. He was the
um,
CEO of the
I,
company and he didn't
I,
exercise his power.
Yeah, I agree with you. I disagree with you, however. He's always been a digital rogue, and he was always under the opinion, and this goes back to his earliest days, that platform and content should never the twain shall meet in terms of accountability. He
Yeah.
believed in free speech. He believed that you should post whatever the hell you want. that platforms should not be accountable. He believes that. He actually, it was Sheryl Sandberg, probably more than
Right.
anyone else from a PR point of view, who told him, Mark, you got to put on a suit. You got to go to Congress looking like one of the Borg. Behave yourself. Say you're sorry because they're going to fuck you. And he obeyed.
But
But I think
you've seen his testimony in front of Congress from
of
like 4 or 5
course,
years
but
ago, and then you see his interview with Joe Rogan, and he's like a totally different person.
I think
It's like he got a new download, you know?
yeah, in all fairness, I think the Zuckerberg you see now is the Zuck from the beginning. And he because of being conditioned and pampered and domesticated by his corporate role, had to transform into someone he's not. So I think he's like, oh man, I should have just done what Elon's been doing, or
Yeah,
I should have had my conversion way earlier.
yeah,
People equate Silicon Valley with the left, and that goes back to Jobs and even Gates with the hippies and the t-shirts. But those guys are entrepreneurial mofos. They are killers at heart. And I think there's been a misapprehension that the techies and Silicon Valley is liberal at the top. It never has been. Honestly, I don't think so. Maybe in concept, or for press junkets. But if you've ever met, and I'm sure you have, a hitter and a mover and a shaker, they are vicious hyenas who will consume everything around them. And with that comes the spirit of zero tolerance for a lot of the stuff that they've been associated with. And
yeah,
this is including Jobs. As we know, he was a gargantuan asshole. He chewed
totally.
people up and ate and spit them out. They were Trumpian in how they managed their businesses.
Right.
They were enlightened despots, and
Yep.
you were playing ball or you weren't. So this hypocrisy about the liberal technorati, I think, is bullshit. And I think it's only natural that these people were at the inauguration. But going back to the inauguration, it didn't just depend on who wanted to show up, it depended on who was invited.
Yeah.
And that goes back to the point of Trump's going to have a big problem if he's focused more on crypto than he is on a dozen eggs. Then he's going to be screwed.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the egg thing is due to the mass
No,
slaughter of the
that's a bad
chickens
a
to due
bad
to the
a bad
things.
metaphor. Bad
But yeah, I
metaphor.
mean,
I'm just talking
we're gonna have
gallon of
inflation
gas.
is we're gonna
Yeah.
have inflation as long as we have a $2 trillion budget, because the Fed monetizes the deficit, and that just increases the monetary base, and that causes inflation. So if you want to do inflation, you got to cut the budget. And as far as the as far as the manufacturer, there is one story. Biden, in a bipartisan move, um, passed what was called the CHIPS Act, which encouraged foreign companies, especially TSMC, to build chip plants in the United States. And so I think it was Arizona, it might have been New Mexico, but it's one of those places. Um, the TSMC was trying to was going to build a plant to manufacture chips, to be a sort of a backup in case Taiwan got invaded. And what they found was, because of all, and this is like in the freaking New York Times. So I'm not like coming off of some weirdo left wing or right wing news that TSMC found that so many DEI requirements are required for that plant, that they would have had to hire 4 unproductive workers for every productive worker, and they basically gave up on. And so it's that kind of thing as far as manufacturing is concerned. It's that kind of thing that I think stifles manufacturing in the United States and has to be gotten rid of. And those are the kind of rules and regulations that were written into the law, by the way, independent of the fact that they violate the Civil Rights Act. They were written into the law, and it's very difficult to run a country when you have to run a company when you have to hire unproductive people as well as productive people to meet some sort of quota. And I think,
Well, for me,
you
you're
know,
preaching to the choir. I'm a huge Coleman Hughes fan. I don't know if you know Coleman Hughes. I think he writes for the Spectator. Check him out.
mhm.
He's an African American man who agrees with you. I in principle agree with you too. And fine, okay, but there's bigger issues about everything that we talked about over the last hour and 20 minutes or so, which is form and content. It's kind of style and execution. And frankly, here we are.
Yeah,
Trump's in power, and now we get to experience the expression, to your point, of the unburdened, unmitigated, unfiltered Trump 2.0. And as far as I'm concerned, I've been saying it out loud. On TikTok, I rant with my little videos of a minute or two. I love doing that on Instagram. And I've been saying it for the past 3, 4 weeks. Bring it. Bring it on. He was elected. He was duly and fairly elected. He was very clear throughout his campaign as to exactly what he wants to do. And frankly, unlike almost all politicians before him, he is not only doing every single thing that he said, but he's doing it at light speed. So, okay, here we go. And I will give him that. And I am eager to see how things play out. And I will also give the administration a benefit of a doubt. There's many, many things that I categorically disagree with. We don't have time to even touch them. I think mass deportation is ridiculous and insane. I don't like the anti-trans bent, even though I do agree that they should not play in sports with the cross gender there, and the list goes on about things that I completely disagree with. However, there's a lot that I agree with. There's a lot that I like, and there's a lot that I'm eager to see play out because top line, or even better, at the bottom of the spreadsheet, I agree with you that we're in an existential fiscal crisis with our debt that should be top of mind and job number one. And it took, Elon standing there in the Oval Office with his kid on his shoulders to remind everybody that we will be utterly screwed in a matter of years if we don't address this critical problem. And he's right.
yeah, I think like with Ukraine, we kind of got to live with what we have. We go to war with the Trump we have, to
Right.
paraphrase.
Right.
And I know I wish there. I think, for instance, Vance is much more articulate. He's much more educated. He's much more he sort of understands sort of the forgotten men and women of the United States because he came from that background. Um, so I kind of think Trump's you know heir apparent is more what you might be comfortable with. I do I do think that yesterday or the day before, when RFK Jr. was sworn in the Oval Office as the Secretary of HHS, he he reminisced. He introduced his family, reminisced a little bit about when he was in the Oval Office as a child, and then he said, when he met with President Trump um, in the summer, um, President Trump said, "This is what I want to do. This is what I'm going to let you do. You have full, authority in your domain to make America healthy again." He said, "There's nothing written down. There's no contract. Um, we just shook hands, and every single thing Trump said he would do, he did." And he says, I'm just shocked at that, because that never happens in politics. And I think, that's kind of the good part of Trump. You know what I mean? That's a part of Trump we don't really get to hear from. We certainly don't hear it from the news. That and I think Kennedy, I mean, whoever thought I would be voting for Kennedy? I was very much on the Kennedy train. I like Tulsi; she's a former Democrat. To clean out the wretched hive of scum and villainy that is our intelligence agencies, um, and Kash Patel to reform the FBI. I think there's some good there's some good people here. Even Kristi Noem was down there in Western North Carolina talking to the people whose homes were destroyed and who are left for dead by FEMA. Trying to talk to people and figure things out. So I think there's a good team. I wish Trump was a little more a little more moderate in his vocal things. I'm certainly in favor of the two things that you talked about. I'm certainly in favor of mass deportations and eliminating so-called trans athletes from women's sports.
Yeah, well,
Um,
just to clarify, I don't think trans athletes should play in women's sports.
okay,
So just to
and
just to clarify,
yeah,
I don't like the halo effect of the anti-trans sentiment, which is percolating through the whole country. I think from a humanist point of view and a civil rights point of view, I viscerally react to that. And just quickly regarding mass deportations, all moral issues aside, I think it's just stupid for the economy. But that's we're at an hour 25. Let's not even
yeah,
go there. But
right.
just for the sake of clarity of our positions.
Yeah, I don't think you need. I don't think you need to deport all 20 million people. I think as soon as you start deporting people, there will be self deportations, and there's already evidence that that's happening. Um, as people are scared that, if you get caught, you get thrown out of the country with your clothes. If you drive south, you get thrown out of the country with your clothes and all the stuff in the U-Haul and all the money you have and all of that. And so I think there's a huge incentive for illegal aliens to self-deport, and the Biden surge of illegal aliens, which happened over the last, which is like 10 of the 20 million, um, they don't work at all. So it's not going to hurt the economy at all. In fact, it's going to help because they're basically all on welfare. Now
All
you
right,
could you
like I said, we don't
yeah,
have time to go into
yeah,
that. But anyway, it sounds like as two people of the kind of libertarian persuasion, we have different flavors, if you will, that we assign the current situation
yeah,
politically. I think our Venn diagrams do overlap in significant and even foundational ways. And just kind of analyzing the trajectory of our conversation, it's more a matter of style and execution than goal. I think we're both solidly on the same page when it comes to many of the goals of what we're looking to accomplish, which is a stabilized economy, which is a reduction in our debt, and which is a strong yet that unobtrusive, if you will, America, one that doesn't get embroiled in pointless, idiotic wars, which has been our want for pretty much since World War II. And
yeah.
it's a new way of looking. It's a paradigm shift, not only in terms of the presidency, but in terms of America's role in the world and how we really go about thinking and implementing the role of government. And so I think we share a lot in common. I think we could slice and dice it, but both of us feel that we're at a time of change. Trump might not be the best guy to do it, but he's here, and we both, frankly, want him to succeed.
Yeah, I certainly do. I mean, for all its flaws, and they are legion. Um, uh, I have this other podcast called the Liberty Block with some friends of mine, and all we did last year was talk about like every single flaw of Trump, right? But He's turned out better than I thought, and we'll see how it goes. I do recommend everyone go and actually read the United States Constitution. It's a good read. It takes about 20 minutes, and you'll learn things that you never knew before, as opposed to
Well,
reading
bravo
the.
to that. We'll actually put a link to the U.S. Constitution in the notes, along with resources that Ed's going to share, because I think Ed has a strong point of view. He has an educated point of view. He has a very focused point of view. So for those who've listened and are curious, we'll share some additional learn more here resources. And let's pick up the microphone again in about 6 months, or if things accelerate at the pace that they're accelerating so far, maybe even 3 months, and take the pulse of the Trump presidency again from the vantage point of his policies actually having an impact on our economy, on our border, and on our foreign relations globally.
Yep, and
So,
we'll if we don't cut the budget and we have a currency crisis, it looks like you and I are volunteering to go to Mars with Elon and
yeah,
live our lives there.
yeah. It actually having like a third the gravity.
Yeah,
We'll
thank
both
thank goodness.
instantly be even more fit than we are now.
Exactly.
Take care, Ed. Thank you for making time. Check the resources for more links. And thanks for joining me on the Bald and Bloviating podcast. I will continue to bloviate and hope you continue to listen. Thank you.